Go ahead and take your Bibles to Esther chapter 2. So we'll look at the Esther being chosen as queen. So last week we looked at Xerxes and his depraved process to try to find a replacement for Queen Vashti. And so that was just the beginning verses of chapter 2. So today we'll actually look at the rest of chapter 2, and we'll see the introduction to Mordecai himself and to Esther herself as we get into that. So it begins with Mordecai first there in verse 5 of chapter 2. And we'll begin letter A with Mordecai's ancestry. So we talked about this back in the intro lesson to the book of Esther, that Mordecai is from the tribe of Benjamin and most likely a descendant or a close relative of the line of King Saul. So that Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin, and from Saul's father was Kish, which is like a clan of the tribe of Benjamin. And so that's there, Mordecai's listing, Esther chapter 2, verse 5. In Shushan, the citadel, there was a son of a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Verse 6, Kish, and the beginning word is in italics because the translators aren't sure. It's just a pronoun, and they're not sure who the pronoun is referring to. Is it to Kish? Is it to Shimei, Jair? Who is it specifically that was carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who have been carried with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away? So most likely it was not Mordecai himself who was taken captive when the Babylonians took Jerusalem, because that was 100 years before the time of Esther. So probably his father, his grandfather even. So maybe one of these others that are listed. Now, a lot of times in Bible genealogies, it can be a little difficult to tell, is this a direct list, okay, father, son, grandfather, or is this like a really long list and we're just kind of getting the highlights of who the important people are over a couple different generations? And some of the lists, like in Genesis, are very detailed. Okay, so-and-so was this many years old when he had this son born, and then he died this many years afterwards. So that kind of is a very direct father-son line. Something like this is probably more vague, and so more likely this is a highlights of the relatives going way back in the line of Mordecai. So not only would he be of the line of Kish, but that would also mean he has another notable relative in his history, this guy Shimei. Now Shimei we see back in the time of David, when David's son Absalom tries to rebel against him, and Absalom captures Jerusalem. David has to flee and abandon the capital. And as David is leaving, some of the relatives of King Saul, led by this guy Shimei, come to mock him and to curse him along the way. 2 Samuel 16, verse 5 says, Now when King David came to Bahurim, there was a man from the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera, coming from there. He came out cursing continuously as he came. He threw stones at David and all the servants of King David, and all the people and all the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. Also Shimei said thus when he cursed, come out, you bloodthirsty man, you rogue. So David is on his way fleeing, and he's surrounded by his mighty men. Now, if you read the chapters of David's mighty men, these are like tough dudes. I mean, wipe out 700 guys here, 800 guys here. These are like ex-Navy SEALs, special forces, and probably not a good idea to throw rocks at David when he's surrounded by all these Navy SEALs and everything like this. But that's what Shimei decides to do, throwing rocks, and then he's mad at David. Verse 8, the Lord has brought upon you all the blood of the house of Saul. Now, that's not really true. David spared Saul on multiple occasions when he could, and then after Saul was dead, he didn't eradicate Saul's family. He was kind to Mephibosheth and Jonathan's son that was still alive, and David was even Saul's son-in-law as well. So no, David was not like that toward the house of Saul, but this is what Shimei is saying. In whose place you've reigned, and the Lord has delivered the kingdom into the hand of Absalom, your son. So now you are caught in your own evil, because you are a bloodthirsty man. Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Please let me go over and take off his head." So they want to teach Shimei a lesson there. Verse 10, and the king said, "What have I to do with you, sons of Zeruiah? So let him curse, because the Lord has said to him, 'Curse David,' who then shall say, 'Why have you done so?'" So Abishai and Joab are the nephews of David, David's sister Zeruiah, and they're the leaders of David's army. And Abishai and Joab's method of dealing with people they disagreed with was just to stab them. It was like, you got a problem with someone, just under the fifth rib, stab them there, and they're done for. And so that's what Abishai wants to do. And David's like, let's not on this occasion. So verse 11, David said to Abishai and all his servants, see how my son who came from my own body seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjamite let him alone and let him curse, for so the Lord has ordered him. It may be that the Lord will look on my affliction, that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing this day. So then Absalom and his army come out to fight against David. Absalom is killed, and when David is on his way back into Jerusalem, some people come to offer their apologies, including Shimei. So jump ahead to chapter 19, verse 19 of 2 Samuel. Then he said to the king, "Do not let my lord impute iniquity to me, or remember what wrong your servant did on the day that my lord the king left Jerusalem, that the king should take it to heart. For I, your servant, know that I have sinned, therefore here I am, the first to come today of all the house of Joseph to go down to meet my lord the king." But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, answered and said, "Shall not this Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed?" So Abishai is still feeling the same thing. Hey, let's get rid of him. David said, "What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should be adversaries to me today? Shall any man be put to death today in Israel? For do I not know that today I am king over Israel?" Hey, who's the king? I'm the king. You guys start running the show here. I'm the king. Therefore the king said to Shimei, "You shall not die." And the king swore to him. So on two occasions, David spares Shimei's life. Once on the way out when Shimei is throwing rocks at him, and then on the way back when Shimei comes to apologize, David again shows mercy to him. And we don't know 100%, but it's very likely that this Shimei is the great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of Mordecai and Esther themselves. So had David not shown mercy on this occasion, then later on there would have been no Mordecai and no Esther to then rescue the Jewish people when they needed help later on. So David is an example of God's mercy in these occasions. Now, there's a line with that. We don't want to just brush over sin, and we can't just excuse bad behavior. There does have to be punishment for sin, and when people break laws and there are crimes, there has to be punishment for that. But there are occasions for mercy, and mercy and forgiveness can go a long ways, certainly. And so David is being a Christ-like example in that regard. So there's Mordecai's ancestry. We also see Mordecai's adoption. So Mordecai and Esther are actually cousins, and Esther is quite a bit younger than Mordecai, and so then when her parents die, that Mordecai adopts her as his own daughter. So Esther chapter 2, verse 7. Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So here's the introduction to Esther's name. It says there that her Jewish or Hebrew name is Hadassah. That's Hebrew word for myrtle, like a myrtle tree. And then the word Esther, that's the Persian name, and that's the Persian word for star. And so she's an orphan, and Mordecai takes her in. Ancient world was a pretty harsh place. A lot of times adults would die a lot younger than what we experience today. And so it's very common for families to kind of have to adopt their orphan cousins or nephews or different ones. And so Mordecai shows that kindness there to Esther. And that was great of him to make that sacrifice. And again, this is the heart of God and his adoption of her. We see Psalm 68, verse 5, "A father of the fatherless, a defender of widows is God in his holy habitation." And so God is very near to the orphans and very near to the widows and those that have experienced loss. Now, we don't know exactly how old Mordecai is during the events of the book of Esther, but very likely he's at the very youngest, like 45 or so, but probably closer to 50, if not 60 years old. And so it would be very easy for Mordecai to think, the most important thing I did with my life for God is adopting Esther and raising her and taking her in as my own. And nothing wrong with that. But here, as an older man, God has a big plan still for Mordecai. That Mordecai has something for God to do when he becomes royal vizier and when he takes Haman's place. And so we don't ever need to kind of check out or write people off like, oh, well, God can't use them anymore. God can use folks even at any kind of stage in life, any kind of age, that he can still accomplish quite a bit for somebody like Mordecai, no matter where they may be in this chapter of life. We see letter C, Mordecai's advice. So multiple times he tells Esther, don't reveal your Jewish connections. There's no need to bring that kind of extra trouble. So we see this first when Esther is taken, rounded up with the other girls there in the palace, and before she becomes queen. Chapter 2, verse 10, Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. And then later, after she becomes queen again, verse 20, now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as when she was brought up by him. And that was a very wise decision of Mordecai to say, keep this a secret. You don't have to blab about that you have Jewish connections in your family to everybody, but save that for the right time. And we do really see Mordecai making a lot of good choices here along the way. And certainly the book of Esther, not to put down Esther's courage in any way, that her courage to go before the king and to risk her life to save her people. But as queen, Esther doesn't have very much political power. The queen's job was really to produce an heir for the king, and that was about it. So it's not like we think of queens today or first ladies in any sense. And so the theme of the book of Esther is really kind of more about getting Mordecai into an office of power, to get Haman's job to where Mordecai has a position of power. Then he can do a lot to save the Jewish people and then help establish them in the days ahead as they're going back to resettle the land. Now, some reasons Mordecai would say keep your Jewish identity a secret was because of the attitude in the empire as a whole at that time. So when the Babylonians captured Jerusalem, there was a 70-year time that God had prophesied. You're going to be captives for 70 years, and then you'll get to go free when that is up. And that 70 years does expire during the first Persian emperor, Cyrus the Great. Cyrus decrees that the Jews can go back, and so the first group of remnants goes back under the leadership of Zerubbabel. The book of Esther is going to occur after that, but before Nehemiah and Ezra lead other groups of remnants back to the promised land. And so, but when that first group goes back under the leadership of Zerubbabel, while they were gone, the empires had moved in different pagan peoples there into the promised land. So as the Jews are coming back to resettle their homes, the people that had taken their place weren't very happy about this. And then they try to frustrate them every step of the way for preventing them from rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, preventing them from rebuilding the temple. So we see the record in Ezra chapter 4, verse 4, says, then the people of the land tried to discourage the people of Judah. They troubled them in building and hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia. So there's the first king, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia, in the reign of Ahasuerus. So Ahasuerus is Xerxes, the king of Esther. In the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. In the days of Artaxerxes also. Artaxerxes is the next king. He's going to be the king that Nehemiah will be cupbearer to, and the king during Ezra's time. And so you see every single time a new Persian monarch takes the throne that these pagan people in the promised land are writing letters, oh, those Jews are causing so much trouble. And so that's going to kind of spread this anti-Semitic attitude throughout the empire. And there's just going to be tension along the way. And so Mordecai's like, there's no need to go kick the hornet's nest. Let's just keep this to ourselves about what our family connection is. And Mordecai himself, when we get into chapter 3, Mordecai experienced this that really his trouble with Haman wasn't as big a deal until he revealed to his coworkers that he's a Jew. And then suddenly it becomes of epic proportions. Esther chapter 3, verse 4. Now it happened when they spoke to him daily, he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. And at that knowledge, then Haman just goes berserk. Jesus teaches that we need to have wisdom in our actions. Matthew chapter 10, verse 16. Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So we can be wise about things. We don't need to be scheming in any way, but there is a wisdom and a right time for certain actions. Now, we run into this as pastors where, and I'm not saying at all that we need to be ashamed of being a Christian or that we need to hide our witness in any kind of way, but there can be better timing on some things. So, usually when you're talking with somebody new, it's like, hey, what do you do for your work? And then they ask, well, what do you do for your work? And as soon as people find out you're a preacher, they start, whoa, it's like, they start acting weird, like, oh, I need to watch my language, and I need to, and a lot of times people they'll start grasping, hey, what's the first person I know that's kind of semi-involved in church? Like, yeah, my son's best friend's roommate, he runs the sound at his church and he's really involved. So, that gives me a pass there to the idea. Now, I want people to be themselves around me and don't put on airs or anything, but it's just unfortunately a thing people will naturally throw up a barrier when they find out you're a preacher or whatever. So sometimes kind of hang on to that for a little bit or something. We see again with Mordecai, letter D, Mordecai's attention. So he's concerned about Esther while she's been taken into the harem there. And so verse 11, every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. So he's there every day trying to learn. He's wearing a path there in the sidewalks of the palace gardens, trying to see if he can get any news of what's happened to Esther. And so he's pacing. And that's kind of how I operate a little bit. That some of my preacher friends years ago are like, "What, Matt? What do you do to stay so fit?" I'm like, "Well, when I write messages, I pace. I sit down on the computer, I write out a sentence, and then I get up and I walk around and I think about the next sentence. Then I sit down and I write the next sentence. Then I get up and walk around a little bit more." And one of my pastor friends who was a little bit on the larger side, he's like, you need to change that up. You need to write a sentence and then eat a Twinkie. And then you need to write a sentence and then eat a Hostess cake after that. You need to change your approach with that. So maybe I'll do that sometime there. But
I'll bring you some.
Yes, thank you. They almost went out of business with that. So yeah. All right, letter E, Mordecai's alertness. So after Esther becomes queen, there's this plot of these assassins that want to kill Xerxes, and Mordecai overhears that and is able to save the king's life. And that's going to play a big part later in the book of Esther. So there's several things here as we get into this. Verse 19, when virgins were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Okay, so this is after Xerxes has selected Esther as queen. She's replaced Vashti. We have a new official queen. She's beautiful. She's amazing. But we're not going to stop gathering girls from around the empire. That's what it says there. I mean, virgins were gathered a second time. We're just going to keep up that policy there, which, as we looked at last time, was kind of standard practice everywhere you went, unfortunately. So again, Xerxes has the wrong view of marriage, so he's not going to be satisfied no matter how beautiful a wife he has. So he's going to keep on looking. And so verse 20, now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as when she was brought up by him. In those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So we see Mordecai, he's at the king's gate, listed there both in verse 19 and verse 21. That doesn't mean that he's like some kind of lowly slave. If he was, then Haman would have just been able to get rid of him with no problems. But likely Mordecai is a person of a little bit of social standing, some kind of rank. In Persian culture, the kind of high officials of the Persian court, they would hang out around the king's gate. And whenever the king needed something, hey, who's out at the gate? Oh, send him in and you go do this for me type. So they just waited for whatever the king needed. So Mordecai probably has a little bit of social rank in order to be here at this time. And he overhears of this plot. Now, last time we talked about how as empires would expand and they would conquer other territories, they would take the young men from the conquered territories, and some of them, they would turn them into eunuchs and send them back to the palace to be guards of the women of the harem, because they couldn't trust anyone to guard the women who could possibly father a child. And horrible practice that is. And you could see through that, you'd probably have a little bit of problems with loyalty among your people that are your guards there. They wouldn't be very friendly toward you, and they wouldn't have a very good attitude about that. So Bigthan and Teresh want to kill the king. It says there in verse 21 that they are doorkeepers. So that means they're royal guards right there outside the door of Xerxes' chambers where he sleeps. So they have a lot of opportunity, a lot of direct access to the king. They can easily pull this off. And Mordecai hears about it, so he passes that on, verse 22. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther. Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. When an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed. Both were hanged on a gallows, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. If you like old westerns, old John Wayne movies or whatever, you need a good hanging every now and then. It's not a good movie if we don't have a good hanging there somewhere along the way. So we do have our hanging here at the end of chapter 2 in Esther. And several things in these verses. Verse 22, Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. That's very important, that Esther did not just take the credit all to herself, but gave that credit to Mordecai, because that's going to come into play later when that is reviewed. And then they confirm it, and then at the end of verse 23, it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So the court records of what happened each day were kept in a book, and then when that, or scroll, more like we would think of, and when that scroll filled up, then they would go file that in the archives, and they would start on another scroll. And so this scroll, when it gets filled up, it's going to sit on the shelf for 5 years. And then 5 years later, when Xerxes can't sleep, he's going to send one of his servants, hey, go grab something really boring off the shelf to read so I can finally fall asleep here. And you got a whole wall of scrolls, and surprise, surprise, that servant just happens to grab the one that has this record of Mordecai saving his life in this place. So 5 years will go by till we see that again. And we do see with Mordecai saving the king's life, Xerxes is a jerk. I mean, there's no other way around it. He's a bad dude, and not a good person to work for, not a good husband, not anything. And it could have been very easy to justify, he's a bad dude, let's just let these guys get rid of him. He deserves it, type thing. It would have been easy to think that way. But yet Mordecai doesn't take justice into his own hands. He does the right thing, even though Xerxes didn't really deserve Mordecai doing the right thing. And we see that over and over in Scripture when God's people will be in a position where they're either enslaved or underneath the king who really is a jerk. You see that in Genesis when Joseph is bought by Potiphar. Potiphar is a jerk of a boss. His wife really is a jerk of a boss. But Joseph does his best and is the top working slave for Potiphar, not because Potiphar deserved it, but because he's not working directly for Potiphar. He's really working as a testimony for the Lord. Same thing, Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that they work there for Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is an egomaniac, builds a giant statue of himself covered in gold and all the insane things that this guy does. And yet they're the best working counselors of all of his wise men, not because Nebuchadnezzar deserved it, but because they're doing their best for representing God. We see this. Paul writes, Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5. Bondservants, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in sincerity of heart, as to Christ. Not with eye service as men pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with goodwill, doing service as to the Lord and not to men. So even in here a bondservant or a slave and master relationship, or today an employee to a manager or a boss type relationship. Even if your boss is a jerk, you're working for Jesus ultimately, and you need to be a testimony of Jesus. You need to represent Jesus and do your best, even if you have difficult coworkers, because God deserves our best, certainly there. That's who we're ultimately representing in the workplace. And that's a good thing to tell, like to young people when they're looking for their first job or something, that they need to have a good attitude, because it's probably going to be a little bit, they're probably going to have some difficulties at first getting settled into that, but they need to come in with a biblical attitude for that. Okay, over to Esther. Let's shift to her. And so we see letter A about Esther, her custodian. So as Xerxes gathers beautiful women from all around the empire, Esther is one of those who is taken, and the Lord grants her favor with this guy Hegai, who is in charge of all the women of the virgins' quarters. Esther chapter 2, verse 8. So it was when the king's command and decree were heard, when many young women were gathered at Shushan the citadel under the custody of Hegai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace in the care of Hegai, the custodian of the women. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor. So Xerxes is gathering women from all across the empire, but really the one he ends up selecting is Esther, who was right there in the capital city in the first place. And yet Esther is able to win favor of people very quickly. We don't know why. Was that her looks? Was it her smile, her charm, or whatever it is, her kindness? But she gains favor. And here, this guy Hegai, so he's one of those eunuchs who's in charge of the virgin quarters, the women, young women who have not been sent to the king yet. And so he's in charge of getting them ready, beautifying them as their year-long preparation before they see the king, and keeping peace among them. I can't say that's necessarily a job I would want there. That's probably a lot of drama he's got to manage there and try to keep all that balanced with that. But that's what he does. And so Esther impresses him, so he gives her every advantage before she goes to see Xerxes. And so we see, letter B, Esther's cosmetics, her preparation. Verse 9, so the young woman pleased him, she obtained his favor, so he readily gave beauty preparations for her besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace. He moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. So he gives her all the advantages. You got 7 full-time maidservants, one for hair, one for nails, one for feet, one for, every kind of beauty thing you could think of here. And not only that, but she gets the best quarters there in the virgins' part of the harem in their preparation. So he's given her a leg up in every way possible. And last time we talked about it seems so weird, this year-long process of them soaking in perfumes and everything before they go see the king. And I couldn't find much as far as explanations for that, of why did it take so long, other than the only thing I came across was, again, this is a system with zero trust. You've got men who can't possibly father a child. And so they would keep these women apart for a year, also to ensure that none of them were pregnant by another man or something as they are brought in. Again, this it's so weird to us, but it's like in these cultures that believe the king is a god, and so they have to bring offspring of the god, and we have to ensure that's a pure divine bloodline from the god carried on to his son. And so the extreme lengths they would go to that is kind of insane, certainly. And now, when I was, junior high or whatever, very popular, all these chick flicks about, like, you take an ordinary girl, and like if we give her the extreme makeover treatment, then any ordinary person can become astoundingly beautiful, like Anne Hathaway there in the Princess Diaries, or the Miss Congeniality movies, or all the common chick flicks of that time. There. Now, you'd imagine any girl, if you get 7 full-time women to do all your beauty there, it's going to improve, certainly, and get top-notch royal treatment with this. However, the Bible says there's more important things than just the outward attention. And so we see there in the New Testament that the inside beauty matters more in the eyes of God. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 9. In like manner also that the women adorn themselves in modest apparel with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing. So nothing wrong with some, but the Bible says there is such a thing as too much there, certainly. So it can be over the top. Verse 10, but which is proper for women professing godliness with good works. So that inner attitude of a woman that professes godliness, that when people look at her, more than being wowed by her appearance or her figure, it should be that she exudes a godly attitude. That should be the main thing they notice about her. 1 Peter chapter 3 talks about the situation of a saved wife and an unsaved husband. He says in verse 3, do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. So that inner beauty of a heart toward God, that's not going to fade with time. External beauty, that's going to kind of wear thin a little bit as age catches up to all of us. But inner beauty can grow more beautiful with time as a person grows closer in their walk with God. And so that's that matters more to God, and to the right kind of guys, that inner beauty should matter more to them as well. Let her see about Esther, her chance. So she gets her chance to go before Xerxes. She gets her one night. Everyone else, Xerxes is taking these women one night at a time. Most of them he sends back to the other house of the concubines and never sees them again, probably for the rest of their lives. And so Esther gets her chance to come before. Verse 15, now when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, to go into the king, she requested nothing but what Hegai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. So what we looked at in chapter 1, Xerxes banishing Vashti, that was in year number 3 of his reign. Esther will become queen in year number 4, but she's been in preparation for a whole year before that. So it's about 3 years that this process started of gathering these women for Xerxes. So she gets her chance, but she also has her counsel that Hegai tells her what to do. Here's the best thing you can have to wow the king and to win him over. And so we see letter D, Esther's counsel. Now, all kinds of memes online and things like, hey, guys are pretty simple. We're not complicated. So, just very basic things. Example, like you can just give stuff to men. Here's a video game. They'll be impressed with it. If he's into that. If he's into, building model airplanes, give him a model airplane. If he's into golf, give him some golf balls. If he's, into fishing, give him a new fishing rod. Something. It doesn't take much. Guys are pretty simple there. And so here, verse 15 again, that she requested nothing but what Hegai, the king's eunuch, custodian of the women, advised. So Esther listens to what Hegai says. The Bible doesn't give us the details. What was it that Xerxes really liked, that Hegai knew about, that he told Esther that won him over? We don't know. Did she bring his favorite dessert? Was it she wore a particular outfit or a particular thing of jewelry that he really liked, or she sang a favorite song? We don't know what it was there, but she listens, and whatever it is, Xerxes is impressed with that. And so now we see letter E, Esther's coronation, that she becomes the queen. Verse 17, the king loved Esther more than all the other women. She obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther, for all his officials and servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of the king. So Esther becomes the new official queen, takes that place. We're have a grand celebration across the empire for this. Now, there are not many film depictions of the book of Esther. I've talked about VeggieTales a little bit. That's worth watching in itself. But there is a movie called One Night with the King. They're about the story of Esther and Xerxes and Mordecai. Um, like anything with Hollywood, it certainly has its flaws there. Now, in this movie, Xerxes' quest to find a new wife is kind of like a Miss America pageant. All the girls are performing different talent show and type things there for him, and he's just bored to death. I need so misunderstood. I got to find the right person to completely. And then Esther comes along. Oh, we understand one another, and we have this amazing connection. You finally complete me, and they just have this whirlwind romance, and Esther becomes queen. And that's kind of Hollywood's version of things there. That's not really how it happens in the Bible. And a couple years ago, I saw this Bible play, similar thing of Samson in the book of Judges, that Delilah is just so misunderstood, and Samson's the only one who can truly understand her, and they just have this song together, and it's like, no, that's not at all the basis of their relationship. Anyway, as tropey as Hollywood wants to make it be there. So you can watch One Night with the King. It's not all bad. In my opinion, they made Xerxes a lot like Elvis of today, so but keep that in mind. Now, we do see in the Bible later when Mordecai goes to Esther, hey, we're in a bad way. We're all going to get wiped out. Can you do something to help us? Esther replies in chapter 4, verse 11, all the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king who has not been called, he has but one law, put all to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. Okay. If you're not seeing your spouse, if you're going more than 30 days without seeing your spouse and they live in the building next to you, there's some kind of problem with your marriage there. It's pretty simple to say that. And so Xerxes and Esther are not star-crossed lovers that just have this amazing romance. I'm sorry. No, and that's kind of too bad for Esther that she didn't have the most romantic relationship there, but she was where God wanted her to be, and she did what God wanted her to do to save her people in spite of that, in spite of the sacrifices that had to be made with kind of having a jerk of a husband there along the way. But all of this is really just God's direction. So Esther getting favor from Hegai and the advice from Hegai, Esther being impressed, the king being impressed with her, selecting her as queen, all of that is really God directing things behind the scene. We see Nehemiah mentions this when Nehemiah asks the next king, Artaxerxes, if he can go rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 7. Furthermore, I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given to me for the governors of the region beyond the river, that they must permit me to pass through till I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he must give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, which pertains to the temple, for the city wall, and for the house that I will occupy. The king granted them to me according to the good hand of my God upon me. So Nehemiah knows I'm not winning this because of my charm or anything, that this is God granting favor, moving upon the heart of the king to grant these letters to give us permission to go back and rebuild the walls and do what we need to do to help the people. And in the book of Esther, the name of God is not mentioned directly, but it is the exact same thing. It is the hand of God giving Esther favor to Hegai and favor with the king, and for Mordecai to hear the plot. All that is God ultimately directing there behind the scenes. And we see that with Daniel, when Daniel's taken into Babylon, and the steward of the young men that Daniel is given favor with him when he asks, hey, can we eat these vegetables instead of drinking all the beer and everything that's going to defile us and make us unhealthy? Can we do something else instead? And so the favor that happens there, and that's what we need to pray in our lives, that God will give us favor with the right people, whether that's in our workplace, our neighbors, our family relationships. Here with the building, we certainly need God's favor with the right people to try to move things along there. So can pray for that, and we can see God at work through those situations. So we will stop there. Any questions or anything for the rest of chapter 2? Okay, well, next time we'll try to do chapter 3 and chapter 4. The story really starts moving along a bit quicker, so try to knock those out.